A cruel husband forced an abortion and divorced her. 5 years later, she returned with their child, and he didn't recognize her. Revenge was unstoppable. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to the Mr. Peter Stories family. I have a humble request for you all. Can you help me reach a milestone of 10,000 followers? There are just 3 days left, and I've taken on a challenge with my beautiful wife, who's sitting right here smiling at me. It's a small request from my heart to yours. I'm sorry if this bothers you in any way. If you've supported me, type yes in the comments to let me know. And how was the last story? Don't forget to tell your thoughts about the last story. Now let's move on to today's story. The setting sun painted Manhattan's skyline in hues of amber and gold, its dying rays reflecting off the glass and steel of the Montgomery Tower, like flames dancing on a funeral pyre. Thaddeus Montgomery stood at its apex, 68 stories above the bustling streets below, his tailored Brioni suit as dark as his thoughts. At 35, he cut an imposing figure, tall and lean, with shoulders bred for bearing the weight of empires and eyes the color of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. His corner office, larger than most Manhattan apartments, bore witness to his meteoric rise in the business world. African mahogany panels lined the walls, their deep, rich tones complementing the Italian marble floors that had been quarried specifically for the Montgomery Tower. Original paintings from masters long dead hung like silent judges, their gilt frames catching the last rays of daylight that pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Thaddeus raised a crystal tumbler to his lips, letting the aged Scotch, older than he was, roll across his tongue. The liquid burned, but not enough to chase away the hollow feeling that had taken residence in his chest 5 years ago. He hadn't named that feeling yet. Wouldn't name it. Names had power, and Thaddeus Montgomery had spent a lifetime ensuring that he was the only one who wielded power in any room he occupied. The soft hum of his private elevator announced an arrival, breaking his reverie. His secretary, Cornelius Blackwood, a man who had served the Montgomery family since Thaddeus was in short pants, stepped into the office with the silent efficiency of a ghost. "The quarterly reports, sir," Cornelius announced, his British accent as crisp as the day he'd arrived from London 30 years ago. "And a reminder about tonight's Philanthropy Alliance Gala." Thaddeus didn't turn from the window. Below, the city was coming alive with artificial light, a constellation of human ambition spread out at his feet. "Cancel it." "If I may, sir," Cornelius ventured, his reflection in the window showing the slight arch of an eyebrow, the most extreme expression of disapproval he ever allowed himself. "Your father never missed the Alliance Gala in 40 years of running this company." The mention of his father made Thaddeus's jaw tighten. Randolph Montgomery II had been dead for 3 years, but his shadow still loomed large over everything Thaddeus did. The old man had built Montgomery Industries from a modest shipping company into a global conglomerate, and he'd never let anyone forget it, especially not his only son and heir. "My father," Thaddeus said, turning finally to face Cornelius, "is dead, and I am not him." "Indeed not, sir," Cornelius agreed, his tone neutral but his eyes knowing, "which is precisely why your presence tonight is crucial. The old guard is watching, waiting to see if the young Montgomery is as committed to philanthropy as his predecessor." Thaddeus set his glass down on his desk, a massive slab of blue granite that had once graced a Japanese emperor's palace. The old man's voice echoed in his head. "Power isn't just about what you can take, son. Sometimes it's about what you're seen to give." "Fine," he conceded, adjusting his platinum cufflinks, a graduation gift from his mother before cancer had taken her too soon. "Have Harrison bring the rolls around at 8. Cornelius nodded, satisfaction barely visible in the slight softening around his eyes. "Very good, sir. Shall I have your usual tuxedo pressed?" "The new Tom Ford," Thaddeus decided. "Black on black." He turned back to the window, effectively dismissing his secretary. But Cornelius lingered, his reflection wavering like a ghost in the darkening glass. Was there something else? "The board is concerned, sir," Cornelius said carefully, "about your personal life." Thaddeus felt his shoulders stiffen. "My personal life is none of their concern." "With respect, sir, everything about a Montgomery is the board's concern. Your father was married at 28. By 35 he had already—" "That will be all, Cornelius." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire before Cornelius bowed slightly and retreated. The elevator doors whispered, shut behind him, leaving Thaddeus alone with thoughts he'd rather not entertain. Marriage, family, legacy. The words felt like leashes around his neck, trying to drag him into a life prescribed by others. He'd seen what marriage had done to his father, watched as the brilliant, ruthless businessman became a doting husband, weak with love. When cancer had taken his mother, that same love had nearly destroyed the great Randolph Montgomery. It had taken years for him to recover, and even then he was never the same. No, Thaddeus had decided long ago that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Power was cleaner, safer, more reliable. The intercom buzzed softly. "Mr. Montgomery, your car is ready." Thaddeus straightened his tie, checking his reflection in the window. The man who stared back at him was perfect, polished, powerful, untouchable, just as he preferred. The Philanthropy Alliance Gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a venue grand enough to match the egos of its attendees. As his Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the city streets, Thaddeus reviewed the mental dossier he maintained on every major player he was likely to encounter. Old money, new money, and those desperately pretending to have any money at all, they would all be there, playing their parts in the grand theater of New York high society. Harrison, his driver of 15 years, navigated through the Friday evening traffic with practiced ease. The car's interior was silent, save for the subtle purr of the engine and the occasional tap of Thaddeus's finger against his phone screen as he scrolled through the evening's guest list. They arrived fashionably late, late enough to make an entrance, but not so late as to appear rude. The Met's facade was lit up like a crystal palace, its steps crowded with the elite of New York society in their finest plumage. Photographers' flashes created a strobe light effect as they captured the arrival of each notable guest. As Harrison opened his door, Thaddeus adopted the expression he reserved for these occasions. Confident but not arrogant, approachable but not weak. It was a careful balance, one he had perfected over years of public appearances. The cameras turned to him as he ascended the steps, their flashes intensifying. He heard the whispers follow him. Montgomery, younger than his father, doubled the company's value, still single. The great hall had been transformed for the evening. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the gathering of New York's most powerful individuals. The air was thick with expensive perfumes, overconfident cologne, and the intangible but unmistakable scent of money. Thaddeus accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, noting with approval that it was the Krug his office had insisted upon. The Montgomery name demanded certain standards after all. He had just begun his obligatory circuit of the room when he saw her. She stood near the Temple of Dendur, its sandstone columns forming a dramatic backdrop to her figure. Her dress was a deep burgundy that seemed to absorb light, making her rich brown skin glow like burnished gold. But it was her expression that caught and held his attention. She was looking at one of his board members, Augustus Vale, with an expression of such polite disdain that it bordered on art. "That's the look of someone who's caught Augustus in a lie," came a familiar voice at his elbow. Regina Whitmore, his father's oldest friend and most trusted advisor, had materialized beside him with her usual impeccable timing. "Who is she?" The question escaped before he could stop it, and Regina's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Amarantha Washington," she said, a note of approval in her voice. "New Orleans old money, though the money's long gone. Put herself through Yale Law School, graduated top of her class. She's been making waves in corporate law, specializes in ethics compliance and minority shareholder rights." Thaddeus watched as Amarantha said something that made Augustus's face flush red. "She doesn't seem impressed by Vale's usual charms. That's because she's just dismantled his argument about minority shareholder voting rights in front of half the corporate law community in Manhattan," Regina said with poorly concealed glee. "The girl has teeth." As if sensing their attention, Amarantha turned, her eyes meeting Thaddeus's across the crowded room. They were extraordinary eyes, amber-colored and intelligent, with a hint of mischief that suggested she knew secrets about everyone in the room and found them all terribly amusing. She didn't look away, didn't demurely drop her gaze as so many did when confronted with his stare. Instead, she raised her champagne glass slightly, a gesture that managed to be both acknowledgement and challenge. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Thaddeus felt something stir in his chest, something that had nothing to do with power or business or the carefully ordered world he had built for himself. It felt like danger. It felt like possibility. It felt like falling. "I should rescue poor Augustus," he said, already moving toward them. Regina's laugh followed him. "I don't think it's Augustus who needs rescuing, dear boy." How right she was. But it would be months before Thaddeus understood that, and years before he admitted it. For now, he moved through the crowd with the confidence of a man who had never lost a battle, never faced a challenge he couldn't overcome, never met an obstacle he couldn't bend to his will. The night spread out before him like a blank canvas full of possibility and promise. Manhattan glittered beyond the museum's windows, a kingdom of light and shadow that had always been his playground. But for the first time, its glitter seemed dull compared to the spark in a pair of amber eyes. Thaddeus Montgomery was about to learn that some forces couldn't be controlled, some feelings couldn't be negotiated with, and some battles were lost the moment they began. But that understanding was still in his future. For now, he straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and prepared to introduce himself to the woman who would, though he didn't know it yet, both complete and destroy him. The game was about to begin. Chapter 2. The fall spring in Manhattan had arrived like a whispered promise, cherry blossoms dusting Central Park in pale pink, while fresh green buds stretched toward an impossibly blue sky. But inside the master bathroom of the Montgomery penthouse, winter still reigned. Amarantha Washington. Montgomery stood frozen, staring at the 3 pregnancy tests lined up on the marble countertop like soldiers bearing life-changing news, all positive. Her hands gripped the edge of the vanity, knuckles white against the expensive stone. The signs had been there for weeks, the fatigue, the subtle changes in her body, the cravings that had her sending her assistant on mysterious errands for New Orleans-style beignets at odd hours. She had waited to take the tests until Thaddeus was away on business in Singapore. 3 days of negotiations that would add another billion to the Montgomery empire. Now, on the morning of his return, she had finally gathered her courage. The early morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching on the massive diamond on her left hand, a Montgomery family heirloom that had graced the hands of 4 generations of Montgomery wives. 18 months of marriage had not dulled its sparkle, just as 18 months had not dimmed the fierce love she felt for her husband, despite their occasional battles of will. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of passion and intellectual sparring, each recognizing in the other a worthy opponent and partner. Thaddeus had pursued her with the same intensity he brought to his business dealings, but Amarantha had made him work for every inch of ground he gained. She had her own career, her own ambitions, and she refused to be merely a trophy in the Montgomery collection. That had been part of what attracted him. She knew. Her refusal to yield, to be impressed by his wealth or intimidated by his power. Their wedding had been the society event of the year, with old money and new gathering to witness the union of the Montgomery scion and the brilliant attorney from New Orleans who had captured his heart. The sound of the private elevator humming to life snapped her from her reverie. Thaddeus was home early. She quickly gathered the tests, wrapping them in tissue paper and tucking them into her robe pocket. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she made her way to the living room. The elevator doors opened silently, revealing her husband in all his imperial glory. Even after 3 days of international flights and negotiations, Thaddeus Montgomery looked immaculate in his black Tom Ford suit. His storm-grey eyes softened slightly at the sight of her, the only tell he ever showed of his feelings. "You're supposed to be in court this morning," he said by way of greeting, setting his briefcase down on the Italian leather sofa. His voice carried the faintest hint of concern beneath its usual authority. "I had Josephine reschedule." Amarantha moved toward him, her bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. "We need to talk." Something in her tone made him still, his hand pausing in the act of loosening his tie. She had seen this before, the way he shifted from husband to CEO in the space of a heartbeat, his eyes turning calculating as they searched her face for clues. "Is this about the Wilson case? I told you, we can handle any fallout from—" "I'm pregnant." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through the carefully ordered peace of their morning. Thaddeus's face went completely blank, the expression she had seen him use in boardrooms when receiving catastrophic news. "How long have you known?" His voice was perfectly controlled, betraying nothing. "I just confirmed it this morning." She pulled the tests from her pocket, still wrapped in tissue. "But I've suspected for a few weeks." He didn't take the tests, didn't even look at them. Instead, he turned and walked to the window wall that overlooked Central Park, his back straight as a blade. "This isn't the right time." 4 words, 4 simple words that turned her world to ice. "The right time?" Amarantha repeated, her voice low with disbelief. "When exactly would be the right time, Thaddeus? When you've acquired every company in Manhattan? When you've built towers on every continent?" He didn't turn around. "You know the situation with the board, the hostile takeover attempt from Sterling Industries, the investigations into our Asian subsidiaries. A child now would be a complication." "A complication?" The word tasted like ashes in her mouth. "This is our child, Thaddeus. A piece of both of us. A miracle." "Miracles," he said coldly, "don't help stock prices." Amarantha felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the foundation of everything she had believed about their marriage, about his love for her. "Look at me," she demanded. When he didn't move, she raised her voice, something she had never done in their 18 months of marriage. "Look at me, damn you." He turned, his face still wearing that terrible blank mask, but his eyes held something that made her blood run cold, calculation, as if she were a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. "There are excellent clinics," he said, his tone businesslike, discreet. "I'll have Cornelius make the arrangements." The crack in her chest widened into an abyss. "You want me to get rid of our child?" "I want you to be practical." He moved toward her, his movements precise and controlled. "This isn't about want, Amarantha. This is about necessity. The Montgomery Empire is at a crucial juncture. We cannot afford distractions." "Distractions?" She took a step back, one hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "Is that what our child would be to you? A distraction from your precious empire?" "Don't be dramatic," he said, and the patronizing note in his voice made something snap inside her. Dramatic? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You want me to kill our child for the sake of your quarterly earnings report, and I'm being dramatic? This isn't about— When did you become this? She cut him off, her voice thick with pain and rage. When did you turn into this thing that sees everything, even love, as a transaction to be managed? For the first time, his mask slipped slightly. I am what I have always been, Amarantha. You knew who you were marrying. No, she whispered, the truth of it hitting her like a physical blow. No, I thought I was marrying a man capable of love, capable of putting someone above his own ambition. I thought I was marrying a human being, not a corporation with a pulse. There is no us without the empire, he said, his voice hardening. Everything we have, everything we are, exists because of what I've built. What you've built? She gestured around the luxurious penthouse. Your father built this empire, Thaddeus. You've just been desperately trying to prove you deserve it ever since. The words struck home. She saw it in the way his jaw clenched, the barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. Get rid of it, he said, each word precise as a knife strike. Or get out. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the constant hum of Manhattan seemed to fade away, leaving them suspended in a moment that would define the rest of their lives. Amarantha looked at her husband, really looked at him. She saw the boy who had lost his mother too young, the son who had never felt good enough, the man who had built walls around his heart so high that even love couldn't scale them. She saw all of this, and for the first time since she had fallen in love with him, she felt nothing but pity. You're right about one thing, she said quietly, reaching up to remove the Montgomery diamond from her finger. This isn't about want, this is about necessity, and I cannot, will not, be the kind of mother who chooses an empire over her child. She placed the ring on the coffee table, the diamond catching the morning light and throwing fractured rainbows across the walls. I'll have my lawyers contact yours, she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her heart. I assume you'll want this handled quietly. Amarantha. For the first time, there was something like uncertainty in his voice. Don't do this. Be reasonable. Reasonable. She smiled, though it felt like her face might shatter. I am being reasonable. I'm choosing life over death, love over fear, humanity over power. Those seem like very reasonable choices to me. She turned and walked toward their bedroom, soon to be just his bedroom, her bare feet silent on the marble floors. She had a go-bag packed, a habit from her childhood when hurricanes could force evacuation at a moment's notice. How fitting that it would serve her now, in the face of a different kind of storm. If you walk out that door, his voice followed her, hard as granite, you walk away from everything. The prenup is clear, you leave with nothing. She paused, but didn't turn around. No, Thaddeus, if I walk out this door, I leave with everything that matters. You're the one who will have nothing. The morning sun continued to pour through the windows, painting the world in deceptively gentle colors, as Amarantha packed the essentials of her life into a single bag. Her law degree, won through years of sacrifice and determination, the pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's sole inheritance, a photo of her parents, taken in front of their New Orleans home before Hurricane Katrina had taken both the house and them. She changed into a simple black dress, her armor for court appearances, and stepped into her Louboutins. The red soles felt like war paint. Thaddeus stood exactly where she had left him, his face still wearing that terrible blank mask. But something had shifted in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Good. Let him feel a fraction of what she was feeling. This is your last chance, he said as she walked past him toward the elevator. Think about what you're throwing away. She pressed the elevator button, her finger steady despite the trembling in her heart. "No, Thaddeus, this is your last chance. Think about what you're choosing to destroy." The doors opened with their usual silent efficiency. She stepped inside, turning to face him one last time. "I love you," she said softly. "God help me. I still love you, but I love this child more. And someday, when you're alone in your empire of steel and glass, I hope you understand what that kind of love means." The doors closed on his expressionless face, and Amarantha Washington felt her world split in two, everything she had been and everything she would become. As the elevator descended, she placed both hands on her stomach, feeling the infinite possibility growing beneath her heart. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "But don't worry. Mama's got a plan." The elevator reached the lobby, its soft chime announcing not an arrival, but a departure. Amarantha stepped out into the spring morning, cherry blossoms swirling around her like nature's own rebellion against the cold geometry of Manhattan's towers. She didn't look back at the Montgomery building as her town car pulled away from the curb. Looking back was for people who regretted their choices, and Amarantha Washington had made the only choice she could live with. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that 5 years from this moment, she would return to this very spot, but she wouldn't be alone and she wouldn't be powerless. For now, though, she had a war to plan, and wars, as any good strategist knows, are won long before the first battle is fought. Chapter 3. Shattered Dreams. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Montgomery Tower had been designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered vertigo-inducing views of Manhattan, while the black marble table stretched like a frozen river through the center of the room. The chairs, Italian leather and chrome, were deliberately set 2 inches lower than standard, forcing visitors to look up at whoever sat at the head of the table. Amarantha knew all these tricks. She had helped design them. Now, 3 days after walking out of the penthouse, she sat on the wrong side of that table, facing the full might of the Montgomery legal team. 7 attorneys, each billing at least $1,000 an hour, arranged like silent sentinels across from her. At the head of the table sat Thaddeus, his face carved from the same marble as the table between them. Her own attorney, Prudence Blackwood, sat beside her. The irony of hiring Cornelius Blackwood's daughter to represent her wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Prudence had her father's British Reserve and her mother's Louisiana Fire, a combination that had made her one of the most feared divorce attorneys in New York. "The terms are non-negotiable," Harrison Wells, Montgomery Industries' chief counsel, was saying. His voice had the practiced smoothness of old Scotch and inherited wealth. Mrs. Montgomery signed a prenuptial agreement that was quite clear about the consequences of voluntary separation. "That agreement," Prudence countered, her London meets Louisiana accent adding steel to silk, "was predicated on good-faith negotiations and full disclosure. My client was not made aware of several key assets, including the offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands." A muscle twitched in Thaddeus's jaw, the only indication that the shot had landed. Amarantha kept her face perfectly composed, though her stomach churned. Morning sickness, she had discovered, cared nothing for dramatic confrontations. "Those holdings," Harrison replied smoothly, "were corporate assets, not personal ones. They weren't relevant to the prenuptial agreement." "Corporate assets," Prudence echoed, opening a leather portfolio with deliberate slowness, "that were transferred to personal accounts 3 days before the agreement was signed. I have the transfer records here, if you'd like to review them." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Amarantha watched as the other attorneys exchanged glances, their confidence wavering for the first time. She had spent 18 months as the wife of one of New York's most powerful men, but she had spent 7 years before that as a corporate lawyer specializing in finding exactly these kinds of hidden transactions. "That's impossible," Harrison said, but his voice had lost some of its smoothness. Those records are sealed. Nothing is impossible, Prudence smiled, the expression reminiscent of a cat with a cornered mouse. When you know where to look. And my client knows exactly where all the bodies are buried, doesn't she, Mr. Montgomery? For the first time since the meeting began, Thaddeus spoke. His voice was cold enough to freeze flame. If Mrs. Montgomery wishes to pursue this line of investigation, she should consider the consequences carefully. Corporate espionage is a serious crime. It's not espionage when the information was legally obtained during the course of her duties as your wife and legal counsel, Prudence countered. Or did you forget that you gave her full access to the company's books when you were trying to impress the board with your trust in her? Another hit. Amarantha saw it in the way Thaddeus's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his Mont Blanc pen. She had been more than a trophy wife. She had been his partner in every sense, helping to modernize Montgomery Industries' corporate governance structure, strengthening their ethical compliance protocols, earning the trust of board members who had initially seen her as nothing more than a beautiful distraction. "What do you want?" Thaddeus asked, addressing her directly for the first time. Amarantha met his gaze steadily. The storm-grey eyes that had once looked at her with such passion now held nothing but calculated assessment. "Freedom," she said simply, "clean and complete." "You can have it," he replied instantly. "Sign the papers renouncing all claims to Montgomery assets, and you can walk away today." "And the child?" The room went absolutely still. None of the attorneys had been told about the pregnancy. It wasn't in any of the draft documents, wasn't part of the official narrative being constructed. "There is no child," Thaddeus said, his voice hard as diamond. "Not yet, and there won't be." Amarantha felt Prudence stiffen beside her, but she had been prepared for this moment. She reached into her Hermes bag and withdrew a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the marble expanse toward her husband. "What is this?" Harrison asked, reaching for the document. "Medical confirmation of my pregnancy," Amarantha said calmly. "Dated 2 days ago. I'm 8 weeks along. The Montgomery heir is very real, very healthy, and very much my priority." The legal team erupted into furious whispers. Harrison's face had gone pale, while the junior associates frantically began flipping through their documents, looking for contingencies that hadn't been planned for. But Amarantha watched only Thaddeus. She saw the moment the implications hit him, saw the calculating machine behind his eyes spinning into overdrive as he reassessed everything in light of this new information. "This changes nothing," he said finally, though they both knew it changed everything. "The prenup is clear about children as well. Any offspring will be provided for, but control remains with the Montgomery family." "Control?" Amarantha laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You think you can control this? Force me to give up my child like some 19th century industrial baron? The courts, she cut him off, would be fascinated by the recording of you threatening to leave me with nothing if I didn't terminate this pregnancy. Or perhaps they'd be more interested in the documented pattern of financial coercion, the hidden assets, the questionable tax structures in the Cayman accounts." For the first time, she saw real fear flicker across his face. Not for himself. Thaddeus Montgomery had never feared for himself, but for the empire he had inherited and expanded, the empire that meant more to him than love, than family, than the child growing beneath her heart. "You wouldn't," he said softly. "It would destroy everything." "No," she corrected him, her voice gentle but implacable. "It would destroy you. The company would survive. The board would see to that. But your reputation, your carefully constructed image as the worthy heir to the Montgomery legacy, that would never recover." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the endless hum of Manhattan seemed muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath. "What do you really want?" Thaddeus asked finally, and for a moment, just a moment, she heard an echo of the man she had fallen in love with. The man who had once looked at her across a crowded museum and seen something worth pursuing. "I want you to make a choice," she said, laying her hands flat on the marble table. "Not as the CEO of Montgomery Industries, not as Randolph Montgomery's heir, but as a man, as a father. Choose your child over your pride, your love over your power, your humanity over your empire." He stared at her for a long moment, and Amarantha felt her heart tremble with something dangerous, hope. But then his eyes hardened again, becoming the eyes of a man who had chosen his path long ago. "Harrison," he said, not looking away from her, "prepare the final divorce papers. Standard terms, full confidentiality, generous support for the child once paternity is confirmed. Mrs. Montgomery will sign them today." The hope in her heart didn't die. It crystallized, turning into something harder and sharper than diamond. "Very well," she said, rising from her chair with the grace her grandmother had drilled into her through years of cotillion training. "Prudence, please review the documents. I'll sign whatever keeps me and my child free of the Montgomery name." "Amarantha," Thaddeus said as she turned to leave, "don't do this. Don't turn this into a war." She paused at the door, looking back at the man she had loved, still loved, God help her, with all her heart. "You're the one who chose war, Thaddeus. I'm just accepting the declaration of hostilities." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of legal language and initials on endless pages. Amarantha signed away her claim to the Montgomery fortune, to the life she had built, to the future she had imagined. But with each signature, she felt lighter, freer, more herself. The sun was setting by the time she walked out of Montgomery Tower for what she thought would be the last time. The spring evening was soft around her, cherry blossoms still dancing on the breeze, like nature's own rebellion against the hard edges of the city. Her town car was waiting at the curb, but instead of getting in, she turned to look up at the building that had been the center of her world for the past 18 months. Somewhere up there, Thaddeus was probably already moving on, already restructuring his world to eliminate any trace of her presence. "He thinks this is the end," she murmured, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. "But you and I know better, don't we, little one? This is just the beginning." She got into the car, her mind already racing ahead to the next phase of her plan. She had walked away from the Montgomery fortune, yes, but she hadn't walked away empty-handed. She had something far more valuable than money. She had knowledge of every weakness in the Montgomery Empire, every skeleton in its gleaming closets, every pressure point that could be squeezed. And she had time to plan, time to prepare, time to build something of her own that would make the Montgomery Empire look like a child's sandcastle against the tide. "Where to, Mrs. Washington?" her driver asked, deliberately using her maiden name. Amarantha smiled, watching Montgomery Tower recede in the rearview mirror. "The airport, James. We're going home to New Orleans. I have a grandmother to visit and an inheritance to claim." As the car pulled away from the curb, she felt the weight of the Montgomery name fall away from her shoulders. She had entered that tower as Thaddeus Montgomery's wife, but she was leaving as something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The war was just beginning, and Amarantha Washington had always been a better strategist than anyone gave her credit for, especially her soon-to-be ex-husband. In the gathering darkness of Manhattan, a new story was taking shape. A story of love turned to steel, of power meeting its match, of an empire built on pride, about to face its greatest challenge. And at its heart, growing stronger with each beat, was the tiny life that would change everything. Chapter 4. The Return. 5 years could change everything and nothing at all. The Metropolitan Museum of Art still stood like a marble sentinel on Fifth Avenue, its steps still crowded with the elite of Manhattan society for the annual Philanthropy Alliance Gala. The same event where Thaddeus and Amarantha had first met now served as the stage for their inevitable reunion. Thaddeus Montgomery stood at the top of the grand staircase, surveying his domain with the detached air of a man who had everything and felt nothing. At 40, he had grown more powerful, more feared, more alone. The past 5 years had seen Montgomery Industries expand across 3 continents, absorb 12 major competitors, and double its market value. Success had left its mark on him, threads of silver at his temples, deeper lines around his eyes, a hardness to his mouth that never quite softened. "The Thompson merger is causing ripples in Asia," Regina Whitmore murmured beside him. Still his father's most trusted advisor, even a decade after Randolph's death. "The ethics compliance teams are nervous." "They're always nervous," Thaddeus replied, taking a measured sip of 30-year-old scotch. "That's what we pay them for." "Perhaps," Regina said carefully, "if we had someone with real expertise in corporate ethics review the structure." He turned to her sharply. They both knew who she was referring to. "Don't." Regina sighed, the sound almost lost in the murmur of the crowd below. 5 years is a long time to punish yourself, Thaddeus." "I'm not punishing myself," he said flatly. "I'm protecting the company. The empire comes first. It always has. And has it been worth it?" Before he could answer, a ripple went through the crowd below. Conversations stuttered, heads turned, glasses paused halfway to lips. Thaddeus followed their gaze and felt the world stop spinning. Amarantha Washington stood in the entrance of the great hall, and she had brought spring with her. Her dress was the color of midnight blooming into dawn, floating around her like captured starlight. 5 years had turned her beauty from merely stunning to legendary. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had built something of her own, who answered to no one. But it wasn't her presence that had shocked the cream of New York society into silence. It was her companion. A small boy, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, held her hand. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo that matched his mother's elegance, his golden-brown skin glowing in the warm light of the crystal chandeliers. But it was his eyes that caused Thaddeus's glass to slip from suddenly nerveless fingers. Storm-grey eyes. Montgomery eyes. His eyes. The crystal shattered on the marble floor, the sound like breaking ice in the hushed room. Amarantha's gaze snapped up, finding him instantly at the top of the stairs. Their eyes met across the space, across the years, across the chasm of what might have been. "My God," Regina breathed beside him. "She didn't." But she had. The evidence stood before them, small and perfect and undeniable. The boy, his son, looked up at his mother with a question in those familiar eyes. "It's all right, Augustine." Amarantha's voice carried clearly in the unnatural quiet. "Why don't you go say hello to Mrs. Whitmore? She's an old friend of your grandmother's." Regina moved without hesitation, descending the stairs with remarkable speed for a woman of her years. The crowd parted before her like the Red Sea, creating a path to where Augustine stood. "Hello, young man," Regina said warmly, extending her hand. "I knew your grandmother Celeste when we were girls in New Orleans. Would you like to hear about the time she put frogs in the punch bowl at her debutante ball?" Augustine's face lit up with a smile that was pure Amarantha. "Did she really?" "Oh, indeed she did. Come, let me tell you all about it while your mother catches up with old friends." The boy went willingly, clearly well trained in social graces. As Regina led him toward the Temple of Dender exhibit, conversation gradually resumed around them, though now charged with electric undertones of scandal and speculation. Thaddeus forced himself to move, each step down the marble staircase requiring conscious effort. Amarantha waited at the bottom, her expression unreadable. She had always been the better poker player. "Hello, Thaddeus," she said when he reached her, her voice carrying the warmth of New Orleans summers and the bite of Manhattan winters. "You're looking well." 5 years, he said, his own voice sounding strange to his ears. 5 years? And you never— "Never what?" she challenged softly. "Never told you about the son you demanded I eliminate? Never informed you about the child you were willing to trade for market share?" Each word was a precise strike, aimed at vulnerabilities only she knew existed. "I had a right to know." "Rights?" Her laugh was like cut crystal, beautiful and sharp. "You surrendered your rights when you chose your empire over your humanity. Or have you forgotten that day in your office?" He hadn't forgotten a single moment. The memory haunted him with increasing frequency as the years passed, as his empire grew colder and emptier. "He's beautiful," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Something flickered in Amarantha's amber eyes, pain, perhaps, or memory. "He is. He's brilliant too, reads at a third-grade level already, loves dinosaurs and space and asking impossible questions about everything he sees." Each detail was a dagger to his heart, a glimpse of all he had missed, all he had thrown away. Why now? Why come back? Because it was time. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, the movement elegant and deliberate. Time for Augustin to know his heritage, his history. Time for the world to know the truth. The truth. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The truth is, you hid my son from me for 5 years. "No," she corrected him calmly. "The truth is, you chose to hide from your son for 5 years. I never changed my name, never left the country, never disappeared. I've been building my own empire in plain sight, waiting to see if you would ever choose love over power." He followed her gaze to where Augustin sat with Regina, his small face animated as he listened to stories of his grandmother's youth. The boy's laugh carried across the room, bright and pure and perfect. "What do you want?" Thaddeus asked, falling back on familiar territory. "Negotiation." "Want?" Amarantha turned back to him, and now there was something dangerous in her smile. "Oh, Thaddeus, you still think this is about what I want? This is about what you're going to lose." "Is that a threat?" "Not at all, it's a prophecy." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same jasmine and vanilla she had worn when they first met. "You see, while you've been building your empire of steel and glass, I've been building something far more valuable, something that will bring your careful construction tumbling down, not with violence or scandal, but with truth and justice and the power of love you were too afraid to embrace." "You're talking in riddles," he said, but cold fear was spreading through his chest. "Am I?" She glanced at her watch, a Patek Philippe that he recognized as having belonged to his mother. "You'll understand soon enough. The first act begins tomorrow morning when the SEC announces their investigation into Montgomery Industries' ethical compliance procedures. Specifically, the ones you dismantled after I left." The fear crystallized into ice. "How did you—" "I told you 5 years ago. I know where all the bodies are buried." She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise over a battlefield. "But that's just the overture. The real performance is yet to come." "Why?" he demanded, struggling to keep his voice level. "If this is about punishing me—" "Punishment?" She shook her head, genuine sadness crossing her face. "No, Thaddeus, this isn't about punishment. This is about redemption. Your redemption, specifically. I'm going to tear down everything you think matters until you finally see what really does." She stepped back, creating distance between them, just as Augustin came running back, his small feet silent on the marble floor. "Mama!" he called out, excitement making his storm-grey eyes sparkle. "Mrs. Whitmore says Grandmama Celeste used to race horses bareback." "Did she now?" Amarantha caught him up in her arms with practiced ease. "Well, we'll have to ask her about that when we visit next weekend, won't we?" The boy nodded enthusiastically, then seemed to notice Thaddeus for the first time. His expression turned curious, studying Thaddeus's face with an intensity that was painfully familiar. "Hello," Augustine said politely, extending his small hand. "I'm Augustine Washington. It's a pleasure to meet you." Thaddeus stared at the offered hand, so small, so perfect, so much like his own had been at that age. When he didn't move, the boy began to withdraw, uncertainty crossing his face. "Augustine," Amarantha said smoothly, "this is Mr. Montgomery. He's an old friend of Mama's." "Oh," the boy brightened. "Like from the big building, we can see it from our apartment." "Yes, exactly like that." Amarantha set him down gently. "Why don't you go ask Mrs. Whitmore about the time Grandmama Celeste's horse got into the country club dining room?" Augustine needed no further encouragement, darting back through the crowd with the boundless energy of childhood. Thaddeus watched him go, feeling something crack in the carefully constructed walls around his heart. "He has no idea, does he?" he asked quietly. "Who I am?" "He knows exactly who you are," Amarantha replied. "You're the man who owns the big building he sees from his window, the man whose company makes the news, the man who chose that building over him before he was even born." She smoothed her dress, a gesture he remembered from their courtship days when she was preparing to deliver a killing blow in court. "What he doesn't know yet is that you're also the man who's about to lose everything he thought was important, only to find out what really matters. And you think destroying my company will accomplish that?" "No." Her smile was gentle now, almost pitying. "I think saving your soul will accomplish that. The company is just collateral damage." She turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Thaddeus. That tie pin you're wearing, the one that belonged to your father. Augustine has the same dimple in his left cheek when he smiles. Just in case you were harboring any doubts about paternity." With that, she glided away through the crowd, leaving Thaddeus standing alone amid the glittering assembly. He watched as she collected their son, and made her way to the exit, Augustine's happy chatter floating back to him like fragments of a life he could have had. The boy turned at the door, those storm-grey eyes finding him one last time. He waved, a small hand raised in farewell or perhaps prophecy, before disappearing into the New York night. Thaddeus Montgomery stood in the wreckage of his carefully ordered world, surrounded by the power and wealth he had chosen over love, and felt the first tremors of an earthquake that would shake his empire to its foundations. The game he had thought ended 5 years ago was only just beginning, and this time Amarantha Washington wasn't playing to win. She was playing to save him from himself. Chapter 5. Truth's Thorns. The morning after the gala dawned cold and clear, sunlight glinting off the steel and glass canyons of Manhattan like nature's own spotlight on the drama about to unfold. In her corner office on the 38th floor of a renovated Art Deco building in Tribeca, Amarantha Washington watched the sun rise over her former husband's empire. Her own office was everything the Montgomery Tower was not. Warm woods, soft fabrics, and walls lined with art from emerging painters she'd discovered in Paris and New Orleans. A child's drawing of what might have been a dinosaur or possibly a very enthusiastic giraffe held pride of place on her desk, secured in a handcrafted frame. "The SEC filing went live 10 minutes ago," Prudence Blackwood announced, striding into the office with her tablet in hand. 5 years had only sharpened her edge, transforming her from a feared divorce attorney into something far more dangerous, a corporate crusader with a perfect record of ethical compliance victories. "And?" Amarantha didn't turn from the window. "Stocks are already responding. Montgomery Industries dropped 12 points in pre-market trading." Now she did turn, settling into her chair with the grace of a queen ascending her throne. That's just the tremor before the earthquake. What about the board? Prudence's smile was pure predator. Emergency meeting called for 9 a.m. Your intelligence was perfect. Harrison Wells is already laying groundwork to protect himself, trying to distance the legal department from the compliance failures. And the Asian subsidiaries? Our sources confirm that 3 vice presidents are already preparing to turn state's evidence. They're scared, Amarantha. 5 years of operating without proper oversight, cutting corners they thought no one would ever notice. Because they thought I was gone for good, Amarantha finished softly. They forgot who designed those oversight systems in the first place. Who knew exactly where to look when they started dismantling them. Her phone buzzed, a text from Augustine's nanny, confirming he was safely at school, excited about his show-and-tell presentation on planets. The simple message centered her, reminding her why all of this was necessary. "What about Thaddeus?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Still dark. He hasn't left the penthouse since last night." Prudence hesitated. "Are you sure about this part of the plan? It's not too late to—" "It was too late 5 years ago," Amarantha cut her off gently. "Everything that happens now was set in motion the moment he chose power over love. I'm just helping him understand the cost of that choice." A soft chime from her computer announced the arrival of an email she'd been waiting for. The subject line was simple. "Package delivered." "Right on schedule," she murmured, opening the attachment. "How long do you think it will take him to read through it all?" Prudence moved to look over her shoulder at the document, a comprehensive report detailing every ethical violation, every questionable decision, every moral compromise the Montgomery Empire had made in the past 5 years. But more than that, it contained something far more damaging, the truth about what those decisions had cost in human terms. "There's enough here to keep investigators busy for years," Prudence noted. "The SEC filing is just the tip of the iceberg." "That's not what I asked." Prudence studied her friend's face, understanding dawning. "You want him to read it all, to really understand." "Knowledge was always his weakness," Amarantha said, touching the child's drawing on her desk. "He needs to know everything, to control everything. That's what makes him vulnerable, not to attack but to truth." The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Washington, Mr. Montgomery is here." Amarantha smiled. "Right on schedule. Send him up in 5 minutes." As her assistant acknowledged the instruction, Amarantha stood and moved to the window again. From here, she could see Montgomery Tower rising like a monument to ambition and pride. Soon, very soon, Thaddeus would understand that she hadn't spent the past 5 years building a competing empire. She'd spent it building his salvation. The elevator chimed, and Thaddeus Montgomery strode into her office like an avenging angel, his black coat swirling around him. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes deeper than they'd been last night. "How long?" he demanded without preamble. "How long what?" she asked calmly, not turning from the window. "How long have you been planning this? The SEC investigation, the compliance audit, the board uprising, how long?" Now she did turn, studying the man she had once loved, still loved, in her own way. "Since the day you made me choose between our child and your empire, I told you then that you were the one choosing war." "This isn't war," he growled, advancing toward her desk. "This is assassination." "No," she corrected gently. "This is intervention. Did you read the full report?" His hesitation told her everything. "I read enough." "No, you didn't. Because if you had, you'd understand that this isn't about destroying you or the company. It's about showing you what you've become, what your choices have cost, not just our family, but hundreds of families." She moved to her desk, pressing a button that activated the room's display screens. Images appeared. Families displaced by Montgomery development projects, workers laid off after cost-cutting measures, communities devastated by environmental damage that had been carefully hidden from regulatory oversight. This is what your empire is built on, Thaddeus. Not innovation, not excellence, not the values your father believed in. It's built on forgotten people, buried truths, and compromised principles. Business requires hard choices, he started, but she cut him off. Business requires ethical choices. Hard choices are just an excuse for moral cowardice. She softened her voice. Your father understood that. Why do you think he kept the ethical compliance systems I designed even after you forced me out? It wasn't until after his death that you started dismantling them. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. Leave my father out of this. I can't, because this isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about legacy, the one you inherited and the one you'll leave for our son. The mention of Augustine made him flinch. The son you kept from me. The son you rejected before he was born, she corrected. But he's not just your son, Thaddeus. He's your redemption, if you're brave enough to accept it. She moved to the side of her desk, opening a drawer to withdraw a thick folder. Old-fashioned paper, not digital. This contains everything you need to save your company, a complete restructuring plan, new ethical compliance frameworks, reparation programs for affected communities. I've spent 5 years not just documenting the problems, but designing solutions. Why? He demanded, staring at the folder. Why go to all this trouble? Because I meant what I said last night. This isn't about destroying you. It's about saving you. She held out the folder. The board meets in 30 minutes. You have a choice to make, just like you did 5 years ago. But this time, I hope you'll choose better. He didn't take the folder immediately. Instead, he looked at her with those storm-grey eyes that their son had inherited. You could have exposed everything, destroyed the company completely. Why offer a way out? Because Augustine deserves to know his father as the man you could be, not the man you've allowed yourself to become. She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint tremble in his hands. And because I never stopped believing that somewhere inside you, beneath all the armor and ambition, there's still the man I fell in love with, the man who could look at a brilliant young lawyer from New Orleans and see something worth risking everything for. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then slowly, Thaddeus reached for the folder. Reading this won't change anything, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Reading it is just the beginning, she replied. What matters is what you do next. He turned to go, then paused at the door. Augustine. Is he happy? The question caught her off guard, not because of its content, but because it was the first time Thaddeus had asked about their son's emotional well-being rather than his achievements or potential. Yes, she said softly, he's very happy and very loved. Something that might have been a smile touched his lips. Good. That's good. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Amarantha turned back to the window. The sun had fully risen now, its light transforming the city into a maze of shadows and brilliance. In 20 minutes, Thaddeus would walk into a board meeting that could end his career. But she had given him everything he needed to turn it into a moment of transformation instead. The choice, as always, was his. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Augustine's nanny. He had aced his presentation on planets, earning a gold star and the admiration of his classmates. Amarantha smiled, touching the screen gently. Your father is a complicated man, my love, she whispered. But today, he has a chance to become the man you deserve. Let's hope he takes it. The morning light continued to play across the city, turning steel to gold and shadows to possibility. In the distance, Montgomery Tower stood waiting, its future, like its owner's soul, hanging in the balance. Chapter 6. The Battle Begins. The legal department of Montgomery Industries occupied 3 floors of the tower, a maze of mahogany and law degrees where armies of attorneys waged corporate warfare. Today, however, the enemy was within. Thaddeus sat at the head of the main conference table, surrounded by the ruins of his morning. Newspapers were spread before him like battlefield maps, their headlines screaming betrayal. Montgomery Industries faces federal investigation. Ethical compliance failures shake Wall Street giant. Stock plummets as board calls emergency meeting. But it was the custody petition lying innocently on top of this wreckage that truly held his attention. 20 pages of legal language that essentially said one thing: he wanted his son. "It's aggressive," Harrison Wells said, pacing behind him. The chief counsel had aged a decade in the past 24 hours. Full custody, immediate visitation rights, mandatory psychological evaluation of the mother. "Will it work?" Thaddeus interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of sleepless nights. Harrison hesitated. "Normally, with our resources, yes, but Amarantha Washington isn't a normal opponent." Harrison collapsed into a chair, loosening his tie. "She's been 3 steps ahead of us for 5 years. Every move we've made, she's anticipated. The SEC investigation, the board rebellion, the media leaks, it's all too perfectly orchestrated." Thaddeus picked up the custody petition, feeling the weight of the paper, the weight of his choices. She's not just fighting the custody battle, she's using it as a weapon in the larger war. Exactly. Harrison leaned forward. Think about it. The timing of her return, revealing Augustine's existence right before the SEC announcement. She's forcing you to fight on 2 fronts, personal and professional, and she knows exactly how both battles will play out in the media. Ruthless CEO who abandoned unborn child now seeks custody amid corporate scandal. Thaddeus quoted from one of the morning's more creative headlines. "She's painting me as a monster." "No," came a new voice from the doorway. "She's showing you your own reflection." Regina Whitmore stood there, elegant as ever in her Chanel suit, but her eyes held none of their usual warmth. She entered the room like a queen approaching an errant subject. "Regina," Harrison began, "this is a private—" "Oh, do be quiet, Harrison." She waved him away like an annoying insect. "You've given enough bad advice for one lifetime." She took the seat opposite Thaddeus, studying him with the same penetrating gaze that had seen through his childhood pretenses. "Did you read it?" "Read what?" "Don't play stupid, dear. It doesn't suit you." "The report Amarantha sent. Did you read all of it?" Thaddeus glanced at the thick folder sitting unopened on his desk. "I've been a bit busy trying to save my company." "That report is about saving your company, and more importantly, about saving you." Regina's voice softened. "She showed it to me last night after you left the gala. It's, extraordinary." "Extraordinary?" Harrison scoffed. "It's corporate terrorism." "It's a mirror," Regina corrected. "A perfect, painful reflection of every choice this company, you, Thaddeus, has made in the past 5 years. But more than that, it's a roadmap to redemption." Thaddeus picked up the folder, feeling its weight. "You've always had a soft spot for her." "No, dear. I've always had a soft spot for truth. And that boy—" Regina's voice caught slightly. "That beautiful boy who has your eyes and his mother's spirit, he deserves to know his father as a man worth knowing." The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of the city below. Thaddeus opened the folder, began to read. Minutes stretched into hours. Harrison left and returned with coffee, then left again. Regina stayed, silent witness to what felt like a transformation. Finally, as the sun began to set over Manhattan, Thaddeus looked up. His face had the drawn quality of a man who had seen his own soul and found it wanting. "She documented everything," he said quietly. "Every project where we cut corners, every community we damaged, every life we affected. But she didn't just list problems. She provided solutions, detailed, practical, profitable solutions that would actually make the company stronger. Of course she did, Regina said gently. She's not trying to destroy Montgomery Industries. She's trying to save its soul, just like she's trying to save yours. By threatening everything I've built. By showing you what you've really built and what you could build instead. Regina stood, smoothing her skirt. The question is, are you brave enough to see it? To change? Thaddeus looked at the custody petition, then at the report. Two paths diverging, two kinds of power, two possible futures. The board meets again tomorrow, he said finally. They're expecting my resignation. Are you going to give it to them? His hands clenched on the report. Number, I'm going to give them something else entirely. Regina smiled for the first time that day. Good boy. Now, about this custody petition. Cancel it, he said, surprising himself with how right the decision felt. We'll approach it differently, not as a battle to be won, but as a bridge to be built. And the company? Thaddeus stood, moving to the window wall. Montgomery Tower cast a long shadow over the city, just as his choices had cast shadows over so many lives. Implementation of all recommended ethical compliance measures, effective immediately, he said, his voice gaining strength. Full cooperation with the SEC investigation, establishment of a community reparation fund, and, he paused, turning back to Regina, I want to create a new position. Chief Ethics Officer, with full board voting rights and oversight authority. And who would you recommend for such a position? His smile held a hint of his old confidence, but tempered now with something new. Wisdom, perhaps, or hope. I think we both know there's only one person qualified. The question is, will she accept? Regina gathered her things, preparing to leave. That depends entirely on you, dear boy, on whether you're ready to choose love over power, truth over pride, redemption over empire. She paused at the door. Augustine asked about you this morning. Wanted to know if you really helped build the big tower he can see from his window. Thaddeus felt something crack in his chest. Pain and possibility mingled. What did Amarantha tell him? She told him the truth, that you built something very big, but that you're learning to build something even more important, a bridge back to your heart. After Regina left, Thaddeus stayed at the window, watching darkness claim the city. Lights came on in office buildings and apartments, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility. Somewhere out there, his son was probably getting ready for bed, perhaps looking out his own window at the tower his father had chosen over him. Not anymore, Thaddeus whispered to the gathering night. Not ever again. He reached for his phone, composing a text he should have written 5 years ago. I've read the report, all of it. You were right, about everything. Can we talk? Not about custody or the company, about Augustine, about what he deserves, about who I want to become. The response came almost immediately. Breakfast tomorrow. 7 a.m. The little cafe where you first told me you loved me. Bring your heart this time, not your lawyers. For the first time in 5 years, Thaddeus Montgomery felt something that had been missing from his life of power and control. Hope. The battle was indeed beginning, but not the one he had planned. This was a battle for his soul, for his son's future, for the legacy he truly wanted to leave. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to surrender in order to win. Time to build something real, he said to his reflection in the darkened window. Behind him, the lights of his empire twinkled like stars, but for once, he wasn't looking at them. He was looking toward tomorrow. Chapter 7. Queen's Gambit. The cafe hadn't changed in 5 years. The same red awning fluttered in the morning breeze. The same brass bell chimed as Amarantha pushed open the door. The scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. Their old table waited in the corner, bathed in early morning light. Thaddeus was already there, his usual commanding presence somehow softened by exhaustion and revelation. 2 cups of coffee steamed on the table. He remembered how she took hers. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting, sliding into her seat with practiced grace. Her cream silk blouse and tailored charcoal skirt were a deliberate choice, battle armor of a different kind. "Your handiwork," he replied, but there was no bitterness in his tone, just weary acknowledgement. "My handiwork was giving you a chance at redemption." She took a sip of coffee. Perfect, just as she remembered. "Your appearance is the result of your own choices. Always choices with you." He ran a hand through his silver-touched hair. "The SEC investigation, the board rebellion, the media storm, all carefully orchestrated choices designed to back me into a corner." "Not a corner," she corrected. "A crossroads. There's a difference." The morning sunlight caught her amber eyes, turning them to liquid gold. Thaddeus found himself remembering another morning in this cafe, 5 years and a lifetime ago, when those eyes had looked at him with love instead of careful calculation. "The custody petition was a mistake," he said quietly. "Yes, I've withdrawn it." "I know." Of course she knew. She seemed to know everything these days, every move before he made it, every defense before he mounted it. "The board meets in 2 hours, he said, watching her face carefully. "They're expecting my resignation. And what are you going to give them instead?" He pulled a document from his briefcase, not the thick folder of accusations and solutions she had provided, but something new, something of his own making. "A restructuring plan," he said, sliding it across the table. "Complete ethical overhaul, new compliance frameworks, community reparation programs, and—" He paused, watching her eyes scan the pages. "A new position. Chief Ethics Officer with full board voting rights and oversight authority." Her fingers stilled on the paper. Ambitious. Necessary. And who would hold this position? Now came the moment of truth. "You." Amarantha set the document down carefully, her face unreadable. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you the power to ensure Montgomery Industries never strays from its ethical foundations again." He leaned forward. "You designed the original compliance systems. You documented every failure in their absence. Who better to rebuild them?" "Interesting strategy," she mused, stirring her coffee. "Trying to bring me back into the fold? Make me part of the empire again?" "No." He surprised them both with his vehemence. Not the empire, something better, something real. For the first time, something like approval flickered in her eyes. "Tell me about the reparation programs." They spent the next hour discussing details, funding structures, implementation timelines, oversight mechanisms. Amarantha's brilliance shone through in every suggestion, every refinement. She had spent 5 years, not just exposing problems, but crafting solutions. "Augustine asked about you this morning," she said suddenly, interrupting a discussion about community investment strategies. The shift caught him off guard. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if you build actual towers or just own them." A small smile played at her lips. "He's fascinated by construction, builds incredible things with his Legos." Pain and possibility mingled in Thaddeus's chest. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you build things, but you're learning to build relationships too." She met his eyes squarely. "Don't make me regret saying that." "I want to know him," Thaddeus said softly. "Not as a possession to be claimed, but as a person to be loved." "That's a good start." She glanced at her watch. Your board meeting is in 30 minutes. Our board meeting, if you accept the position. Amarantha stood, smoothing her skirt. Let's see how the meeting goes first. Change doesn't happen in grand gestures, Thaddeus. It happens in small choices, made day after day. Like choosing to have breakfast at our old cafe? Her smile held secrets and hope in equal measure. Exactly like that. They walked out together, the morning sun painting Manhattan in shades of promise. A town car waited for Thaddeus, while Amarantha's driver stood by her Tesla. "Augusta has a science fair next week," she said as they prepared to part. "He's built a model of the solar system, all to scale. Ambitious, like his parents." She opened her car door, then paused. 7 o'clock? He presents at 7. The invitation hung in the air between them, fragile as dawn light. "I'll be there," Thaddeus promised. "No lawyers, no petitions, no agenda. Just there." "Good." She slid into her car, but her voice drifted back. "Oh, and Thaddeus? When you present the restructuring plan to the board, remember, they're not just voting on the future of the company, they're voting on the future of your soul." The cars pulled away in opposite directions, but they were both heading toward the same destination: redemption. Thaddeus arrived at Montgomery Tower with 15 minutes to spare. The boardroom was already full, concerned faces, whispered conversations, the weight of expectation heavy in the air. He took his place at the head of the table, laying out 2 documents, the resignation letter they expected and the restructuring plan they didn't. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of generations, but tempered now with something new: humility. 5 years ago, I made a choice that cost me everything that truly mattered. Today, I'm making a different choice. He pushed the resignation letter aside and opened the restructuring plan. "Let me tell you about the future of Montgomery Industries, not as an empire built on power, but as a legacy built on ethics, not as a monument to control, but as a testament to transformation." As he began to outline his vision, he glanced at the empty chair to his right, the seat reserved for the chief ethics officer. Soon, he hoped, it wouldn't be empty anymore. The real Queen's Gambit wasn't Amarantha's intricate plan to expose the company's ethical failures. It was her faith that somewhere inside him, buried beneath years of pride and power, was a man worthy of the legacy he had inherited, worthy of the son he had rejected, worthy of the love he had thrown away. The game wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning, but for the first time, Thaddeus wasn't playing to win. He was playing to become. Chapter 8: Empire's Fall. The boardroom of Montgomery Industries had witnessed countless battles over the decades, hostile takeovers thwarted, mergers negotiated, dynasties preserved. But it had never seen anything like this. Thaddeus stood at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence transformed by something new, a quiet certainty that had nothing to do with power. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast his shadow long across the polished mahogany, a reminder of how far that shadow had reached and how many it had darkened. Before him, spread across the table like evidence at a trial, lay the complete documentation of Montgomery Industries' ethical failures over the past 5 years. Not just Amarantha's meticulously compiled report, but the results of an overnight deep dive by a team of independent auditors who had confirmed every word of it. The board members sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting various stages of shock, anger, and fear as they processed the implications. Harrison Wells had stopped taking notes an hour ago, his legal pad filled with increasingly frantic scribbles that traced the company's vulnerability. "The numbers are undeniable," Thaddeus continued, his voice steady. "Every ethical compromise, every corner cut, every community damaged, it's all here. But more importantly, so are the solutions. He gestured to Amarantha, who sat at the opposite end of the table. She wore a deep burgundy suit that made her look like a judge presiding over a particularly complex case, which in many ways she was. Ms. Washington has prepared a comprehensive restructuring plan, Thaddeus said, noting how several board members flinched at her name, not just to address our past failures, but to transform Montgomery Industries into a model of corporate ethics and community responsibility. "This is absurd," Victor Caldwell, the longest-serving board member, exploded. His face had turned an alarming shade of red. "She orchestrates this witch hunt, threatens our stability, and now we're supposed to trust her to save us?" "No," Amarantha spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the warmth of New Orleans and the steel of Manhattan. "You're supposed to save yourselves. I'm just providing the roadmap." She stood, moving to the presentation screen with the same grace she had once shown in courtrooms. A series of graphs appeared, tracking the company's ethical compliance against its actual profitability over the past decade. "Look at these numbers," she directed. "During my tenure as head of ethical compliance, Montgomery Industries saw a 27% increase in sustainable profit margins. Not just quarterly spikes, but long-term, stable growth built on community trust and ethical business practices." More graphs appeared, showing the decline that followed her departure. And here's what happened when those systems were dismantled. Short-term gains masking long-term vulnerability. "A house of cards built on compromised principles. We've quadrupled our market share," Caldwell protested. "At what cost?" Amarantha clicked to the next slide, showing images that made several board members look away. Communities displaced by aggressive development, workers suffering from unsafe conditions in Asian factories, environmental damage carefully hidden from regulatory oversight. "This is what your market share is built on," she said quietly. "This is the true cost of your success, and it's about to come crashing down." As if on cue, Harrison's phone buzzed. He read the message, his face draining of color. "The SEC has expanded their investigation. They're looking into the offshore accounts." "Which ones?" Caldwell demanded. "All of them." The room erupted into chaos. Board members turned on each other, accusations flying. Harrison began frantically typing on his phone, presumably trying to contact his legal team. Only Thaddeus and Amarantha remained calm, watching the Empire's foundations begin to crack. "Enough!" Thaddeus's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "This is exactly what we deserve, what I deserve. I chose power over ethics, control over responsibility. I dismantled the safeguards Ms. Washington put in place because they constrained my ambition. Every person in this room supported those decisions. We are all culpable." He moved to stand beside Amarantha, a gesture whose significance wasn't lost on anyone present. "But we have a choice now. We can try to fight this, throw money and lawyers at the problem until we're dragged down by our own corruption, or we can choose transformation." Amarantha pulled up the next slide, a detailed organizational chart showing a completely restructured Montgomery Industries. At its heart was a new Ethics and Community Impact Division, with oversight authority over every aspect of operations. "This isn't just window dressing," she explained, her voice taking on the passionate tone that had once swayed juries. "This is a complete reimagining of what a modern corporation can be. Ethical compliance isn't a constraint on profit, it's the foundation of sustainable success." The numbers began to flow. Projections, cost analyses, implementation timelines. Amarantha had spent 5 years not just documenting failures, but crafting a vision of what could be built from their ashes. "The first year will be difficult," she acknowledged. "Stock prices will take a hit as we implement these changes and make reparations to affected communities. But by year 3, our models show a return to stable growth. By year 5, we'll exceed our current market position. but with a foundation that can't be shaken by ethical investigations or regulatory oversight. Because we'll have nothing to hide, Thaddeus added, nothing to fear. Regina Whitmore, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. This goes beyond corporate restructuring. This is about legacy, about what kind of company, what kind of people we choose to be. She turned to face the board, her authority as Randolph Montgomery's oldest friend carrying weight even now. I was there when this company was built, not on cutting corners or hidden accounts, but on innovation and integrity. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. Ms. Washington is offering us a chance to find it again. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Outside the windows, Manhattan continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, unaware that within these walls, an empire was being remade. Harrison cleared his throat. The legal exposure is massive, Amarantha finished for him, but my plan includes a voluntary disclosure program that will significantly mitigate the penalties. More importantly, it includes a comprehensive community restoration initiative that will rebuild trust and establish Montgomery Industries as a leader in corporate responsibility. At what cost? Someone asked. Everything, Thaddeus answered simply, and nothing that matters. He moved to the head of the table again, but this time his posture was different, not a king commanding, but a leader asking for trust. I'm not presenting this as a suggestion. This is happening. The only question is whether it happens with this board's support or with a new one. Amarantha watched him with carefully concealed pride. This was the man she had fallen in love with, not the power-hungry emperor he had become, but the visionary who could see beyond profit margins to something greater. There's one more thing, she said, drawing all eyes back to her. The position of Chief Ethics Officer needs to be filled immediately. Someone with both the expertise to implement these changes and the authority to ensure they stick. You, Caldwell spat, but with less venom than before. Yes. She met his gaze steadily. Not because I want power, but because I've spent 5 years designing this transformation. I know every weak point, every vulnerability, every opportunity for real change. And because you're the only one we can trust, Regina added softly. The only one who chose ethics over empire, truth over power. The board erupted into discussion again, but this time it was different, less panic, more purpose. Amarantha moved to stand by the window, watching her reflection overlap with the city beyond. In the glass, she caught a glimpse of Thaddeus approaching. You never wanted to destroy it, he said quietly, joining her at the window. Any of it. No, she agreed. I wanted to transform it, to make it worthy of its potential, worthy of the legacy your father began, worthy of the future our son deserves. He was quiet for a moment, watching the play of light on the buildings outside. I was wrong about everything. Not everything. She turned to face him. You were right about one thing. Montgomery Industries could be a force for change in the world. You just had the wrong kind of change in mind. The board was calling for attention, ready to vote on the restructuring plan. Before they turned back, Thaddeus asked one last question. Why now? Why not do this years ago? Amarantha's smile held both sadness and hope. Because true change can't be forced from the outside. It has to come from within. You had to see it yourself, choose it yourself. Augustine's science fair is still at 7, by the way. As they returned to the table, where the future of an empire hung in the balance, both knew that the real transformation had nothing to do with corporate structure or ethical compliance systems. It was about a man learning to build something more valuable than an empire of steel and glass. It was about a woman who had found the strength to break something in order to heal it. And it was about a little boy who, without knowing it, had set it all in motion simply by existing. The vote was about to begin, but in many ways, the most important decision had already been made. Not in this boardroom, but in a quiet cafe where two people had chosen to build bridges instead of walls. The empire was falling, yes, but something far more precious was rising from its ashes. Chapter 9. The Board's Verdict. The grandfather clock in the Montgomery Industries boardroom had witnessed generations of decisions that shaped the financial landscape of America. Its steady ticking had counted down to mergers, acquisitions, and corporate coups. Now it counted down to something far more profound: redemption or ruin. Thaddeus watched the second hand move with methodical precision as the board members cast their votes. Each tick seemed to echo in the tension-filled room, a metronomic reminder that time, like truth, was inexorable. Amarantha sat perfectly still at her end of the table, her burgundy suit making her look like a queen presiding over a particularly complex game of chess, which in many ways she was. Her face betrayed nothing, but her fingers traced small circles on the polished mahogany, a tell he remembered from their courtship days, when she was waiting for a jury to return with a verdict. The votes were being tallied by Regina Whitmore, her elegant handwriting recording each decision with careful precision. The future of Montgomery Industries and the soul of its leader hung on those delicate pen strokes. "Before we conclude," Victor Caldwell spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of his 30 years on the board, "I want to address the elephant in the room. This isn't just about corporate restructuring. This is about personal matters between Mr. Montgomery and Ms. Washington." The room tensed. Thaddeus felt his jaw clench, but before he could respond, Regina lifted her head from the tally sheet. "You're right, Victor," she said, her tone carrying decades of authority. "This is personal. It's personal for every worker in our Asian factories who deserves safe conditions. It's personal for every community our developments have displaced. It's personal for every shareholder who trusted us to build something worthwhile, not just profitable." She set down her pen, fixing Caldwell with a steely gaze. "And yes, it's personal for Thaddeus and Amarantha, because sometimes it takes personal pain to recognize professional failures. Sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what really matters." The clock ticked on, its sound like a heartbeat in the charged silence. "The votes are tallied," Regina announced finally, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "On the matter of accepting Mr. Montgomery's comprehensive restructuring plan, including the establishment of the Ethics and Community Impact Division." Thaddeus found his eyes drawn to Amarantha. She had stopped tracing circles, her hands now perfectly still on the table's surface. In her stillness, he saw the same strength that had allowed her to walk away 5 years ago, to build something new from the ashes of their love. "By a vote of 8-4, Regina continued, "with one abstention, the board accepts the plan in its entirety." The tension in the room didn't break, it transformed. Relief mingled with apprehension as board members processed the implications of their decision. Harrison Wells was already on his phone, presumably coordinating with the legal team about next steps. Additionally, Regina raised her voice slightly, commanding attention once more. "On the matter of appointing Amarantha Washington as Chief Ethics Officer with full board voting rights." Now, Thaddeus held his breath. This was the real test, not just accepting the need for change, but accepting its architect. "The vote is 9-3, with one abstention. The appointment is confirmed." Amarantha's expression didn't change, but Thaddeus saw the slight relaxation in her shoulders, a microscopic tell that only someone who had loved her would notice. "Very well," she spoke for the first time since the voting began. "Then let's begin. Harrison, I'll need complete access to all compliance records from the past 5 years. Victor, your Overseas Development Division will be my first priority for review, and Regina ... She paused, a small smile touching her lips. I believe you still have my old office key. Never gave it to anyone else, Regina confirmed, reaching into her bag to withdraw a small silver key. Somehow I knew you'd be back. The board meeting began to break up, members gathering their materials and heading out to begin the monumental task of transforming one of the world's largest corporations. But before they could leave, Thaddeus stood. One more thing, he said, his voice carrying the authority of generations of Montgomerys, but tempered now with something new, humility. Tomorrow morning, the New York Times will run a story. It will detail everything, our ethical failures, our community impacts, and our comprehensive plan for transformation. Not because we were forced to, but because we choose to. Harrison Wells actually dropped his phone. You can't be serious. The stock price? We'll take a hit, Amarantha finished for him, rising to stand at Thaddeus's side. A significant one. But transparency isn't just about revealing failures. It's about showing the world that we have the courage to acknowledge them and the vision to correct them. This isn't just about Montgomery Industries anymore, Thaddeus continued. This is about setting a new standard for corporate responsibility, about proving that ethical business isn't just possible, it's profitable. The clock struck noon, its chimes filling the room with a sound like destiny. The markets open in 24 hours, Thaddeus concluded. By this time tomorrow, Montgomery Industries will be a different company. The question is, are we ready to become different people? The board members filed out, leaving Thaddeus and Amarantha alone in the room that had just witnessed the rebirth of an empire. Through the windows, Manhattan sparkled in the midday sun, unaware that one of its greatest powers was transforming from within. You knew they would vote yes, Thaddeus said, not quite a question. I knew they would follow your lead, Amarantha corrected. The question was whether you were ready to lead them somewhere worth going. She gathered her papers, sliding them into her leather portfolio with practiced efficiency. I have a meeting with the compliance team in an hour, and you have a science fair to prepare for, he finished. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, she confirmed. Augustine has been practicing his presentation all week. He can explain the relative orbital velocities of all 8 planets. 8? Thaddeus raised an eyebrow. Not 9? He has very strong opinions about Pluto's planetary status. Amarantha's smile held warmth he hadn't seen in 5 years. He takes after his father that way, very certain about classifications and categories. The comparison struck him like a physical blow. This small connection to a son he was only beginning to know. Amarantha, he called as she reached the door. Thank you. She paused, one hand on the doorframe. For what? For not giving up. On the company. On redemption. She was quiet for a moment, then turned to face him fully. You know what the hardest part was? Not the research, not the planning, not even raising Augustine alone. It was maintaining faith that somewhere inside you, buried beneath all that pride and power, was still the man I fell in love with, the man who could look at a broken system and see not just problems, but possibilities. And now? Now? She smiled, and it held both sadness and hope. Now we build something new, something real, something worthy of the legacy we want to leave for our son. As she left, Thaddeus moved to the window, looking out over the city he had tried so hard to conquer. From up here, Manhattan looked like a maze of light and shadow, of power and possibility, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't seeing it as territory to be claimed. He was seeing it as a community to be served. His phone buzzed, a text from Regina. Car will pick you up at 6:30 for the science fair. Don't be late. And Thaddeus, wear a tie Augustine would like, the blue one with stars. He smiled, touching his current plain black tie. Of course, Regina would know about Augustine's interest in astronomy. She had probably been keeping tabs on him all along, building bridges while Thaddeus had been building walls. The clock continued its steady count, marking not just time, but transformation. In 24 hours, the markets would open to news that would shake Wall Street to its foundations. But the real earthquake had already happened, not in share prices or corporate structures, but in the heart of a man who had finally learned that the greatest power lies not in what you can take, but in what you choose to give. The empire was changing, yes, but more importantly, so was its emperor. Chapter 10. A Father's Awakening. The elementary school gymnasium had never seen anyone quite like Thaddeus Montgomery. He stood in the doorway at precisely 6:55 p.m., the blue tie with silver stars a splash of whimsy against his otherwise impeccable black suit. Parents in casual attire turned to stare, whispers following in his wake as he made his way through the maze of science fair projects. Each display table held a child's vision of the universe. Volcanoes made of papier-mâché, plants growing toward light, simple machines demonstrating basic physics. But Thaddeus saw only one, a meticulously crafted model of the solar system, suspended in perfect orbital alignment. Augustine stood before his project, small hands gesturing animatedly as he explained planetary motion to a cluster of fascinated classmates. He wore a bow tie that matched his mother's burgundy suit, his storm-grey eyes alive with enthusiasm that transformed him from merely Thaddeus's son into a person entirely his own. Amarantha noticed him first, her slight nod acknowledging his punctuality. She stood slightly apart from Augustine, allowing him his moment of scientific glory, but close enough to step in if needed. 5 years of single motherhood had perfected this dance of support and independence. The average orbital velocity of Mercury, Augustine was explaining with the confidence of a university professor, is much faster than Earth's because it's closer to the sun's gravitational pull. That's why its year is only 88 Earth days. A teacher was making notes on a clipboard, clearly impressed. Thaddeus felt pride surge through his chest, not the familiar pride of power and conquest, but something purer, more profound. "May I?" he asked quietly, approaching Amarantha. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "He's been hoping you'd come, though he'd never say it." Thaddeus moved closer to the display, taking in the intricate details. Each planet was perfectly scaled, their orbits marked with brass wire bent to precise elliptical paths. The sun at the center glowed softly, powered by what appeared to be carefully concealed LED lights. "Did he build this himself?" he asked, noting the professional quality of the construction. "Every bit," Amarantha confirmed. "I offered to help, but he insisted on doing it alone. Said a real scientist needs to understand every part of their experiment." Pride mixed with pain. How many moments like this had he missed? How many triumphs and struggles had he sacrificed for boardroom victories that now seemed hollow? Augustine finished with his current group of admirers and turned, freezing slightly when he saw Thaddeus. For a moment, father and son stared at each other, separated by 5 years of absence and 1 moment of choice. "Hello, Augustine," Thaddeus said softly. "Your model is extraordinary." The boy straightened, unconsciously mimicking his father's posture. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Would you like to hear about the relative orbital velocities?" "I would like that very much." What followed was a comprehensive lecture on celestial mechanics that left Thaddeus stunned. Augustine didn't just know the facts, he understood the underlying principles, could explain why things worked the way they did. His small hands traced orbital paths with precision, his voice growing more confident as he warmed to his subject. "And that's why Pluto isn't really a planet," he concluded firmly. "It hasn't cleared its orbital neighborhood of other objects. That's one of the 3 main criteria for planetary classification, according to the International Astronomical Union." "Impressive," Thaddeus said, meaning it. You've done a remarkable amount of research. Mum got me a telescope for my birthday, Augustine explained. We can see Jupiter's moons from our apartment. Sometimes, he hesitated, then continued with careful casualness, sometimes we can see them from the observation deck of your building too. It's higher up. The implied question hung in the air between them. Thaddeus glanced at Amarantha, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Perhaps, he said carefully, you'd like to view them from there sometime. The building has a professional-grade telescope in the observation lounge. Augustine's eyes lit up, but he looked to his mother for permission. This, too, spoke volumes. About trust, about boundaries, about love freely given and carefully protected. We'll see, Amarantha said gently. For now, I believe the judges are coming for your final presentation. Indeed, a group of teachers and what appeared to be local scientists were making their way toward Augustine's display. The boy quickly straightened his bow tie, a gesture so familiar it made Thaddeus's heart ache. Good luck, he said, stepping back to give Augustine his space, though I doubt you'll need it. The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in poise under pressure. Augustine answered every question with clarity and confidence, his passion for the subject evident in every word. When he demonstrated how the model's lighting system created accurate shadows based on planetary positions, one of the judges actually applauded. He's remarkable, Thaddeus murmured to Amarantha as they watched. He is, she agreed. And he did it all without the Montgomery name or fortune, just curiosity, determination, and love of learning. The rebuke was gentle but clear. Thaddeus accepted it with a slight nod. I was wrong about everything. Not everything, Amarantha corrected softly. You were right about one thing. He is extraordinary, but not because of genetics or inheritance, because of choices, Thaddeus. The ones I made, the ones he makes every day, and now, perhaps, the ones you're finally ready to make. Before he could respond, a commotion at the front of the gymnasium drew their attention. The judges had finished their deliberations. Augustine returned to stand between them, unconsciously reaching for his mother's hand. The grand prize for this year's science fair, the principal announced, for outstanding achievement in both scientific understanding and technical execution, goes to... Augustine's grip on Amarantha's hand tightened. Augustine Washington, for his scale model demonstration of solar system dynamics. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Augustine's face lit up with pure joy as he hurried to accept his trophy, a modest thing of plastic and mock gold, but in that moment more precious than all the treasures in the Montgomery vaults. "Mom," he called out as he returned, trophy clutched to his chest. "Mom, I did it." "You certainly did, my love." Amarantha knelt to embrace him, her eyes shining with pride and tears. "You worked so hard, and it paid off beautifully." Augustine turned to Thaddeus, his excitement slightly tempered by uncertainty. "Did you see about the orbital mechanics?" "I saw everything," Thaddeus said, his voice rough with emotion. "It was brilliant. You're brilliant." The boy beamed, then looked thoughtful. "Mom says you build things too. Big things, like your tower." "I used to think that's what mattered most," Thaddeus admitted, "building big things, having power. But watching you tonight, seeing what you've built," he gestured to the solar system model. "This is better. This is real." Augustine considered this with the seriousness only a child can bring to adult matters. "Maybe," he said finally, "you could build something with me sometime? I have more models at home. Mum says I get my engineering skills from—" He stopped abruptly, looking embarrassed. Amarantha's hand tightened on his shoulder, offering silent support. "From your father," Thaddeus finished gently. Augustine nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Augustine." Thaddeus knelt down, putting himself at eye level with his son. "There's something you should know, something I should have told you the moment I saw you." He looked to Amarantha, receiving a small nod of encouragement. "I am your father," he said softly, "and I have made many mistakes, the biggest of which was not being in your life. But if you're willing, I'd like to try to build something new, something real, with you." The gymnasium continued its noisy celebrations around them, but in that moment there was only this: a father, a son, and the infinite possibility of love finally awakened. Augustine's storm-grey eyes, so like his own, studied him carefully. "Mom says everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were yesterday." "Your mother is very wise," Thaddeus smiled, "and very brave." "Braver than anyone," Augustine agreed solemnly. Then, with the resilience of childhood, "Does this mean I can use the big telescope in your building?" A laugh escaped Thaddeus, the first real laugh in longer than he could remember. "Yes, that and more. If your mother approves and if you're willing to teach me about orbital mechanics." "Deal!" Augustine stuck out his hand formally. "But first, you have to understand why Pluto isn't a planet. It's very important." Thaddeus shook the small hand solemnly, feeling the weight of this moment more than any business deal he'd ever sealed. "I look forward to learning." Later, as they helped Augustine pack up his project, Amarantha touched Thaddeus's arm lightly. "You did good tonight." "I had an excellent teacher," he replied. "Two, actually." She smiled, watching Augustine carefully wrapping his model planets. "This is just the beginning, you know. Real change takes time, commitment, patience." "Like orbital mechanics?" "Exactly like orbital mechanics. Forces pulling in different directions, finding balance, maintaining the right distance." She gave him a meaningful look. "It's all about respect for natural laws." "I'm ready to learn," he said simply, "from both of you." Augustine returned, trophy in one hand and a carefully packed box of planets in the other. "Mom, can we get ice cream to celebrate?" "Mr. Montgomery, Dad is fine," Thaddeus said gently, "if you're comfortable with that." "An ice cream sounds perfect." They walked out together, not quite a family, not yet, but something new and fragile and full of possibility. The New York night sparkled around them, stars barely visible through the city's glow, but present nonetheless, constant as a father's love finally awakened. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, stock market reactions, media scrutiny, the monumental task of transforming Montgomery Industries. But tonight was for smaller things that meant everything: ice cream choices, astronomical facts, and the first careful steps toward building something that no amount of money could buy. Real love, Thaddeus was learning, wasn't about possession or power. It was about being present, about choosing to build rather than control, about understanding that the greatest forces in the universe, like gravity, like love, worked through attraction rather than coercion. His son was teaching him about planetary motion, but more importantly, about how to revolve around something greater than himself. And for the first time in his life, Thaddeus Montgomery was ready to learn. Chapter 11. Amarantha's Victory. The morning sun painted Manhattan in shades of triumph as Amarantha Washington stood in her new office on the 67th floor of Montgomery Tower. The space had been transformed overnight. Gone were the cold chrome and steel furnishings that had defined the Montgomery aesthetic. In their place stood warm woods, comfortable leather chairs, and walls adorned with local artists' work depicting scenes of community and connection. But it was the view that truly commanded attention. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the city awakening, unaware that it was witnessing the dawn of a new era in corporate responsibility. The Wall Street Journal lay open on her desk, its headline bold and undeniable: Montgomery Industries announces revolutionary ethical overhaul markets. Stunned as corporate giant embraces radical transparency. Below that, a smaller headline caught the morning light. Amarantha Washington, named Chief Ethics Officer. Former wife returns to transform company she once left. She picked up the paper, allowing herself a moment to savor the weight of what she had accomplished. Not revenge, as so many had assumed, but reformation. Not destruction, but transformation. The intercom buzzed softly. "Ms. Washington?" "The press is gathering in the main conference room." "Thank you, Beatrice," she replied, smoothing her emerald silk blouse. "Is Mr. Montgomery ready?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Augustine has arrived with Mrs. Whitmore." Amarantha smiled. Of course Regina had brought him. The old fox understood the importance of symbols better than anyone. Today wasn't just about corporate transformation. It was about family, legacy, and the kind of power that couldn't be measured in stock prices. The elevator ride to the conference level was silent, save for the soft hum of precision engineering. Thaddeus waited by the doors, his appearance immaculate as always, but something had changed. The hard edges had softened, the armored exterior showing cracks where humanity could shine through. "Augustine insisted on coming," he said by way of greeting. "Said he wanted to see how grown-ups build things." "Did he now?" She adjusted Thaddeus's blue tie, the one with stars, which had become something of a trademark since the science fair. "And what do you think he'll learn today? That sometimes the strongest things we build aren't made of steel and glass." His voice carried a new quality, humility mixed with hope. "Sometimes they're built of truth and trust." The conference room doors loomed before them, the murmur of assembled press corps leaking through. Regina stood waiting, one hand on Augustine's shoulder. The boy wore a miniature version of his father's star-spotted tie, his face serious with the weight of the moment. "Ready?" Amarantha asked, though which Montgomery she was addressing wasn't quite clear. "Ready," they answered in unison, then shared a startled look that made Regina hide a smile behind her hand. The doors opened to a flash of cameras and a wall of questions. The room was packed. Every major news outlet, financial paper, and industry blogger had sent representatives. This wasn't just another corporate press conference. This was the story of the decade. Amarantha took her place at the podium, Thaddeus standing slightly behind her right shoulder. Augustine sat in the front row between Regina and Prudence, his small face beaming with pride. "Good morning," Amarantha began, her voice carrying the warmth of New Orleans and the strength of Manhattan. "Today marks not just a new chapter for Montgomery Industries, but a revolution in how we think about corporate responsibility and ethical leadership." She outlined the comprehensive changes, the new ethical compliance frameworks, the community reparation programs, the transparent reporting structures. But more than that, she painted a vision of what business could be when built on principles instead of just profit. "We stand here not in defeat, but in transformation," she continued, her voice growing passionate. "Not in surrender, but in evolution. Montgomery Industries will not just acknowledge its past failures. We will learn from them, grow from them, and use them to build something better." The questions came rapid fire. "Ms. Washington, how do you respond to accusations that this is personal revenge?" "Mr. Montgomery, will you maintain control of the company?" "What about the shareholders?" "The stock has dropped 15% since the announcement." Amarantha handled each with grace and precision, but it was Thaddeus who delivered the day's most powerful moment. "Personal?" He stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of generations, but tempered now with wisdom. "Yes, this is personal. Every business decision is personal to someone. We've just forgotten that in our rush to build bigger, reach higher, profit more." He gestured to Augustine in the front row. 5 years ago, I made a choice between power and love. I chose wrong. Today, we're choosing differently. We're choosing to build something that will last, not because of its size or strength, but because of its heart." The room fell silent, cameras clicking softly in the pause. "Ms. Washington," a veteran reporter from the Financial Times spoke up, "you've been offered similar positions at other companies. Why return to Montgomery Industries?" Amarantha smiled, sharing a look with Augustine before answering. "Because true change doesn't come from abandoning what's broken. It comes from having the courage to fix it. Montgomery Industries isn't just a company, it's a legacy. And legacies should be about more than profit margins and market share." The questions continued, but the tone had shifted. This wasn't just another corporate scandal or power play. This was something new, a story of redemption, of transformation, of love conquering pride. As the conference wound down, Augustine made his way to the podium, slipping between his parents with the unconscious grace of childhood. A photographer captured the moment, Amarantha in her emerald silk, Thaddeus in his star-spotted tie, and between them their son, the physical embodiment of what could be built when love overcame fear. Later, in her office, Amarantha stood at the window again. The city stretched before her, not as territory to be conquered, but as a community to be served. The stock price would recover. She had run the numbers meticulously, planned for every contingency. But more importantly, something else was recovering. A family, a legacy, a future worth building. A soft knock at her door revealed Thaddeus holding 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with vanilla, and a hint of chicory, just as she had always taken it. "The board is pleased," he said, setting her cup on the desk. "The initial market reaction was better than projected, and the media coverage is focusing on redemption rather than scandal," she finished. "As planned." He studied her for a moment. "You really did think of everything." "Not everything," she corrected gently. "I couldn't plan for Augustine's reaction to you, couldn't strategize his way of accepting you so readily. That's all him. And a little bit you. And a lot of you," Thaddeus added. "You never poisoned him against me, never used him as a weapon. You gave him the space to form his own opinions, make his own choices. Like father, like son," she smiled, "both learning to choose love over fear." The city continued its eternal dance below them, but up here, something profound had shifted. Victory, Amarantha was discovering, didn't always look like conquest. Sometimes it looked like a father and son sharing a tie design. Sometimes it looked like truth setting a company free. Sometimes it looked like love finding its way home through a maze of pride and power. Her phone buzzed, a text from Augustine. "Can we use the big telescope tonight? Dad promised to show me Jupiter's moons." She showed the message to Thaddeus, whose face softened at the word Dad. "Well?" she asked. "Can we?" The word we hung between them, fragile and powerful as a newborn star. "Yes," he said simply. "We can build something new, something real, starting with Jupiter's moons." Amarantha turned back to the window, hiding her smile in the reflection. The victory wasn't in the press conference, or the stock prices, or even the corporate transformation. The victory was in that simple text message, in a son reaching out to his father, in a family finding its way back to love, in the infinite possibilities that opened up when pride finally bowed to truth. The sun continued its journey across the Manhattan sky, turning windows into mirrors and shadows into opportunities. Below, the city hummed with life and potential. Above, a family began the delicate work of rebuilding what had been broken, one astronomical observation at a time. This, Amarantha knew, was the real triumph. Not the defeat of an empire, but its resurrection into something worthy of the love that had saved it. Chapter 12. Redemption's Price. As twilight painted Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and purple, the observation deck of Montgomery Tower hummed with quiet anticipation. The press conference had ended hours ago, but its impact still reverberated through the financial world. Montgomery Industries' stock had stabilized after its initial drop, as investors began to understand that this wasn't a company's death knell, but its rebirth. Amarantha stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city transform from day to night. Her emerald silk blouse caught the fading light, making her look like a queen surveying her hard-won kingdom. But her victory wasn't about conquest, it was about redemption. The soft whir of the elevator announced her arrival. Augustine burst onto the observation deck, still wearing his school uniform, his eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, Dad, Mrs. Whitmore says we can use the big telescope tonight. Jupiter's moons are going to be visible." Behind him came Thaddeus, his tie with silver stars, now a symbol of change rather than power. The past few weeks had transformed him, softening the hard edges of the corporate titan into something more human, more real. "That's not all that's visible tonight," Thaddeus said softly, moving to stand beside Amarantha at the window. He handed her an envelope, thick with official-looking papers. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the contents. Inside was a complete transfer of shares, a significant portion of his personal stake in Montgomery Industries, signed over to Augustine's name with her as trustee. "Thaddeus!" "It's not about money," he said quickly. "It's about legacy, about making sure our son knows that this transformation is permanent, that some choices once made can't be unmade." Augustine was already at the telescope, making adjustments with surprising skill. "Mom, I can see Ganymede. It's Jupiter's largest moon, did you know? Dad told me it's bigger than Mercury." Amarantha felt tears prick at her eyes, not at the share transfer, but at the casual way Augustine had said Dad. How easily children forgave when they saw real change, real effort, real love. "There's something else," Thaddeus said, pulling another document from his jacket. This one was simpler, a single page with the Montgomery Industries letterhead. "What's this?" "My personal office. I'm moving down to the 66th floor." He met her eyes steadily. "The CEO's office on the 67th should belong to someone who understands that power isn't about height or might. It's about vision." She stared at him. "You're making me CEO?" "I'm acknowledging what everyone already knows. You're the one who saved this company, who saved me." He glanced at Augustine, still absorbed in his astronomical observations. "Who saved us all?" Before she could respond, Regina Whitmore emerged from the elevator, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing a smile that suggested she'd known about this all along. "Well," she demanded, "did you show her?" "She's still processing," Thaddeus smiled, "much like the board will be tomorrow." "The board already knows," Regina waved dismissively. "Who do you think suggested it? We need a leader who understands that ethical business isn't just possible, it's essential. Someone who proved that love is stronger than pride, truth more powerful than empire." Augustine called out excitedly, "Look! You can see 3 moons at once. It's like a whole family of celestial bodies, all orbiting together." The adults exchanged glances, moved by the inadvertent metaphor. Amarantha approached the telescope, placing a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "Tell me about these moons, my love." As Augustine launched into an enthusiastic explanation of orbital mechanics, Thaddeus moved to stand behind them, his presence solid and sure in a way it had never been when he was trying to control everything. "Each moon has its own orbit," Augustine explained, "but they're all connected by Jupiter's gravity. It's like love," Thaddeus finished softly. "The strongest force in the universe." Amarantha turned to face him, her amber eyes meeting his storm-grey ones. "Stronger than pride?" "Stronger than anything," he confirmed. "Strong enough to break an empire and rebuild it into something better, something real." Regina cleared her throat. Perhaps this is a good time to mention that the company's new ethical guidelines include a very progressive policy on workplace relationships between executives. Amarantha laughed, a sound of pure joy that made Augustine look up from his telescope. "Are you trying to play matchmaker, Regina?" "Merely pointing out that sometimes the best way forward is to come full circle," the older woman said innocently. "Besides, Augustine needs both his parents close by if he's going to teach the entire board about astronomy." "Both my parents are already close by," Augustine said matter-of-factly, returning to his telescope. "Look, Europa's coming into view. Did you know it might have an ocean under its ice? Dad showed me the NASA reports." Thaddeus reached out, taking Amarantha's hand in his. She didn't pull away. "I was wrong about everything," he said quietly. "Not everything," she corrected, squeezing his hand. "You were right about one thing. Montgomery Industries could be a force for change in the world. You just needed to understand what kind of change really matters." Above them, Jupiter's moons continued their eternal dance, a celestial reminder that the most beautiful orbits are those chosen freely, held together not by force but by natural law, like gravity, like love. "So," Augustine turned from his telescope, looking at his parents' joined hands with approval, "can we do this every night? Watch the stars together?" "Yes," they answered in unison, then shared a startled laugh. Regina raised her champagne glass. "To new orbits. To real power," Thaddeus added. "To love's gravity," Amarantha finished. Augustine beamed at them all, then turned back to his telescope, secure in the knowledge that some forces, like a mother's determination, a father's redemption, and a child's love, were even more constant than the stars. The night deepened around them, but they were surrounded by light, starlight from above, city light from below, and the brightest light of all, the love that had led them through darkness back to each other. In the end, it wasn't about empire or revenge or even redemption. It was about the courage to build bridges instead of walls, about the wisdom to know that the greatest power lies not in what we can take, but in what we dare to give. And as Jupiter's moons danced their eternal ballet above the city that had witnessed their fall and rise, the Montgomery Washington family held each other close, knowing that sometimes the longest journey ends exactly where it began, under the same stars, with the same hearts, but with wisdom enough at last to cherish what truly matters. Subscribe if you liked.